Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Hi, welcome to Access to Democracy. I'm Roxanne Meshar, and I'm your host for today. And I'm here with our guest, Holly Jenkins, who's going to tell us a little bit about concerns that many citizens and residents in Dakota County have about the plans to do some additional paving and adding trails to Lebanon Park, which many of you might be familiar with. So I'd like to introduce Holly. Welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you for having me.
And I know you have a lot to share with us about what you've learned and what's been going on, but let's just start with a little bit of background. So you're the typical citizen. You're a resident here, and you heard about what was going on at Lebanon Park and started asking questions, but tell us a little bit about your background and how you first became concerned with Lebanon Hills Park.
Okay. Well, first I want to thank you for inviting me to the show. I am president of a citizens organization called Wilderness in the City. We represent a large group of concerned citizens regarding the future of Lebanon Hills. Our organization supports the goals that the county has established for Lebanon Hills, which would be to increase accessibility and to bring more people to the park. We feel, however, that there are ways to achieve those goals that will maintain the character of the park, that will not be quite so impactful to the character of the park.
Okay, and what made you get involved with Wilderness in the City or Lebanon Hills organizations?
Okay.
So how did that come about?
You know, this started actually back in 1999. The county had a plan to develop Lebanon Hills, and at that time their plan included camper cabins, an amphitheater, and they were planning to move the park office headquarters into Lebanon Hills. They were going to put a boulevard from Cliff Road to the new park headquarters. A group of citizens found out about those plans, and they opposed that development concept. That effort led to the formation of a stakeholder task force. The stakeholder task force at that time consisted of residents. The residents represented user groups, so you had one resident that represented hiking, one representative for camping, a representative for skiing, for equestrian, for mountain biking.
All the things we use the park for.
All the user groups were represented. They also had representation from the Minnesota Zoo, the School of Environmental Studies, surrounding communities. It was a wide range of individuals. So this task force also worked together with the general public. They had open meetings, they had public dialogues, and together the task force and the public created the 2001 master plan. Now that plan included strong language for how to implement the master plan. That language included, it specifically spelled out 4 categories for implementation. There was ecological stewardship, water resource management, development, and acquisition. Okay. And the strong language included that as decisions are made regarding implementation and funding strategies, all 4 implementation categories will be of equal priority. That language was inserted into the plan to assure that the plan going forward would be implemented in a balanced approach.
So specifically for that.
Yes.
Yes.
So even with that strong language, however, the county, between the adoption of that plan in June of 2013, they ended up investing $3.8 million in development and only $1 million in ecological stewardship. Now, this new plan does not have any guidelines, so the implementation of the plan will be at the discretion of the county board.
Okay, so that brings up some process issues, and I know you have some concerns with kind of the process and how this is all coming about.
Yes.
And maybe you could share a little bit more about that.
You bet. So that's the history of the park, and now in 2013, citizens became aware again that the county had planned another development plan for the park, and in this case it was to complete the vision that was established in the 2008 Park System Plan. So the 2008 Park System Plan envisioned Lebanon Hills as the hub of the planned regional bicycle network. Citizens found out about this plan and they greatly opposed it. The result of that opposition led the board to form a citizen advisory panel.
What was the opposition by people against the bike trail plan, or this earlier plan?
It was a variety of, the original public comment period, before the plan was even released, there were 55 pages, 180 comments opposing just the concept of developing trails through the park. The board released the draft plan, and that led to hundreds of additional comments that came in.
And those comments are pretty important. So if you live in Dakota County, you became aware right away that there were hundreds of people writing in who had concerns.
Yes.
They wanted to know more.
And most of the concerns were with regard to the impact to the natural resources in the park, the long-term cost, and just changing the nature of the park. This Lebanon Hills, to so many people, offers something unique and different than what you can find at other parks, and people did not want to lose that unique quality of this park.
Since we're talking about those comments too, we're going to later take a look at a couple of the comments. Ali will read a couple of them for us, but I don't know if the camera can zoom in maybe in the next couple minutes or so, but for people who maybe are not living right in Dakota County, you could take a look at the picture here to get a little sense of the beauty of the park and the beauty of Lebanon Hills. Has picnic areas and swimming and lakes on canoeing and kayaking, all kinds of things, so people can get an idea. And the reason the process is important, I think, is because it affects other communities elsewhere too, not just people adjacent to Lebanon Hills.
Sure.
So it's about how we govern ourselves and whose voices are heard and how objections are addressed. It brings up all of those issues at local governance level.
Yes,
I think.
absolutely.
You want to go through a couple comments of the issues that popped up with people?
You bet. I can go over the comments. If I back up to this, to the original, when the draft plan was released, there was a public comment period of 60 days.
Right.
And the majority of those comments were opposed to this concept.
Like 97% of
that was the
comments.
second public comment period. So the first one was still close to 90% opposed. The board decided, okay, we need to slow down and form a citizen advisory panel.
Which was good.
Which was good. So it made people were pleased with that decision. However, compared to the first task force, this citizen panel, the county board appointed individuals. A number of individuals were appointed to the panel that had park planning affiliations. They had appointed a bike shop owner, an equestrian who had a business ties to the park. The process was they limited the scope of work for the panel, and they controlled the process by they invested $200,000 on a facilitator and consultants who then dominated the panel meetings and limited any opportunity for the panel to provide recommendations other than what was predetermined. That's where there's a big concern in the process. It was not the open public engagement that you saw the first time around.
Oh, so different tone.
A different tone, a different outcome. That panel resulted in this in the draft plan that was recently released and received 670 comments, and that's where there were 90% of those 670 comments were opposed to the plan.
So overwhelmingly opposed.
Overwhelmingly opposed. I can read a couple.
Yeah, read
you want me to read a
just so
couple? And
people
these
get
are
a
very
flavor.
representative
Yeah.
of
So that's typical.
of what's included in these 670 comments. This individual stated, "There are no places like the expansive trail system offered by Lebanon Hills Regional Park with minimal development to maintain the experience of being in the wilderness so near urban and suburban life. I urge the Planning Committee to stop plans for development of Lebanon Hills Regional Park to pave trails and make the park like the hundreds of parks surrounding it, removing the truly special experience that Lebanon Hills has to offer." A little bit different twist on this one. Lebanon Hills is a unique place in the Twin Cities Metro Park system because it is largely undisturbed and undeveloped. As such, it is an amazingly wild and precious jewel among our great regional parks. There needs to be such an oasis from the built environment, an actual preserve that is not penetrated and crisscrossed with paved trails, lighting, buildings, and the like. We have many, many facilities that have been developed in that fashion throughout the other regional parks.
Very good. So
And
that
I think
gives
what
us
this
a
hits on,
flavor.
yes, and it hits on the idea that Lebanon Hills offers something to everyone that the other parks don't offer. And by going through with this plan, everyone will lose the unique qualities that Lebanon Hills offers.
So I think some of the questions you've raised should make us maybe want to pause, stop, slow down, get more input, learn a little more, look at the objections more closely, see if there's ways to accommodate that, or maybe ways to take what both groups or people who want to develop as well as people who don't, look at those and maybe come up with something new that accommodates both and keeps the
Yes.
park in its true state and is not loading in the pavement or whatever. So,
Yeah, I think you make a good point. What we would like to see going forward, the board has agreed that the regional bike trails now will be aligned around the park. So there
Just a
is no
step in the right
urgency.
direction, yeah.
I think that's more in line with what citizens have
Yes.
been hoping for. Originally, the connector trail was going to be part of that Greenway network. They are now claiming it will not be. So where's the urgency in pushing this through? And as you said, why not take a step back and let's really visit and find common ground on how to best achieve greater accessibility. How can we provide everyone with a safe and comparable experience in this unique setting?
Yes.
How can we encourage more people to come to this park? Do we have to change the park, or can we think of other ways to do that that would be less financially restrictive?
yes. And we're creative as human beings go. We can come up with new and innovative solutions and things that really accommodate everyone.
Right. I think with an open dialogue, moving forward, making decisions together, we will find common ground. We just need to have that opportunity.
When we talk about the process and kind of what has gone on here, in spite of the wealth of negative comments that have come in, it raises questions. So what do you know, like in terms of who are the county board commissioners accountable to, or are they accountable to the community primarily, or maybe you can explain a little further what you have found out?
My understanding, based on the county's organization chart, is that the county commissioners are accountable to the Dakota County residents.
Okay.
I'm afraid that they don't appear to be acting as accountable as people would like, and we'll see how that plays out in next year's elections.
So they are accountable to us, the taxpayers, and
the
it's
taxpayers
our
will be
concern.
flipping the bill for a lot of this development, and they're saying this isn't how they want to see their tax money spent. The other thing, though, that I think the board is accountable are to the master plans. So when you have a master plan, there really is no system currently set up for checks and balances. So you approve a master plan, but then they're allowed to deviate from it. There's a wide range of deviation. And I find that concerning, because what is the point in putting these master plans together when there's no real accountability to achieving the intent of the plan? That's a concern as well.
That's a good point. Likewise, I think when you consider the process and what's going on here, some questions come up regarding the budget and the money that's going to be spent on this, and who benefits from those dollars being spent one way versus being spent another way, and who's lined up to get contracts for potential work that is being proposed. And I don't know if you have any thoughts along that line or concerns about that.
You know, I think the funding leads to part of the concern over the transparency of this process. The board has been asked numerous times, how is this all going to be paid for? Not just the initial construction we know will come from state, Met Council, legacy funds, potentially federal dollars. But the ongoing cost to maintain it, where is that funding coming from? People have repeatedly asked that question, and we haven't received an answer. The county has not taken a stance on what the funding source will be, and how will they not only pay for this new, the increased cost associated with this new development, but they also intend to restore the park, which has been relatively neglected over the past 10 or more years. They're also going to increase programming. They're going to maintain staffing. Where is all this funding coming from? They haven't been able to cover all those expenses for the past since 2001. Now they're increasing expenses, so we're looking for a lot of funding answers.
Yeah, questions about
we have a lot of questions that have been unanswered.
Where is this in the budget, and how do we accommodate all of that? And why not share? And you're right, in the interest of transparency and to allay concerns and issues, why not be transparent about how the funding will be handled? It's a good question.
And my understanding at this point is that in order you can still receive the funding initially to put in the construction. You don't have to report a funding source. And I think that's a concern that many citizens have because of how much infrastructure is already in need of repairs that there is no funding source for. So now to keep adding to that system is a big concern when there's no real funding source other than taxpayers.
And it should be.
Yes.
So you have mentioned earlier, why not slow down? Why the rush? Let's take a look at how funding will be handled and be more transparent about responding to issues about budget and maintenance and things like that. So if we slow down, it would give us time to address some other issues, maybe natural resource concerns, maybe some other issues as well that maybe you can...
You know, many people have suggested that there's alternatives to bringing more people into this park, and they would be more flexible on the budget long term. What the county is proposing is essentially capital development to cover greater accessibility and to bring more people to the park. And what we're hearing throughout these comments and in public meetings has been, what about a better marketing program? What about a better investing in programs? Bringing in volunteer opportunities, bring more people to this park in non-capital development ways. Give us a chance to do that.
So there are many ways to bring people to the park.
There's many more ways to bring people to the park. It doesn't have to all be about brick and mortar and pavement.
Yes.
Some might be necessary, but let's take some time now that the connector is not part of the Greenway network. Let's take some time and really address those goals and figure out what are all our options. And I don't know why they weren't willing to take the time. To me, when they pulled the Greenway trails out of the park is what they've said to do. That changed the game. That should have changed the game plan. That should have allowed an opportunity for open engagement and discussion.
Breathing space.
Some breathing space. Some room to discuss some of the conflicts in the plan, to find common ground.
And it still could.
And we still could. We still could, absolutely.
What happens now? So we know, like a week ago, people may have read in the paper that the ruling was finished. What happens? What are the next steps in case they're not clear about how it
so the board did adopt the plan despite the significant 97% opposition. 2 board members, I do want to clarify, 2 board members did respond to the public input, and they changed their stand and they did vote no. So Commissioners Egan and Showeiler. So that was appreciated by many. So now the plan will be submitted to the Met Council, and it goes through a series of reviews at that point, and there will be public meetings at Met Council. If they adopt the plan, then going forward, the commissioners, the Board of Commissioners, and the county staff, they have discretion over what parts of the plan to implement. When they start to implement parts and pieces, then they go after the funding. And so it's a long process. It doesn't all get done at once. They don't require that initial funding right up front. It just depends on what parts of the plan they implement.
So there truly is room for a little breathing space.
There is.
And room for citizens to learn more and decide what would maybe best suit their vision or their idea or their needs based on that original plan.
And it would be our hope that, I know that the board made comments that there would be a public process going forward, and if the connector trail is if it is implemented, there would be a public process. We hope that public process will be different than the one that's brought us to where we are to date. We hope that that will indeed include open dialogue and meaningful engagement with the public, making decisions together.
Which at local level is exactly what it should be, because it affects us all.
Yep.
For people who are not familiar with the connector trail and that terminology and what that means, maybe I'll let you explain a little bit more about what that is.
The connector trail was probably the most controversial element of this development plan. And the intent originally was to be the connector. The county has approved a number of regional bike trails leading into the park. And they were all going to meet up on this connector trail, and the connector trail then would go through the park. So it's a hub in a sense. Now the regional bike trails are being designed to accommodate commuting bicyclists as well as recreational needs. By accommodating commuting bicyclists, it turns into a much larger construction project than you would typically see with a winding, meandering recreation trail.
Does that make it a wider trail then?
It makes it wider, and it requires greater sight lines. In the case of Lebanon Hills, if this is indeed designed as a regional bike trail, the consultant told the panel that it would be a 30 to 80 foot wide construction clearance through the 6 miles of the park. What the language in the plan relates more to a meandering recreational trail. However, they have not removed language that would allow it to be the transportation function.
So
does that make sense?
In theory, they're going to stay with a narrower trail, but yet the language remains.
Yes.
It's 30 to 80 feet wide, which is massive, actually.
Right. And that language isn't specifically in the plan. That was told to us by the consultant, the design team. What the plan language includes is the opportunity for the trail to be developed as the recreation, as the transportation function, which would then require the much greater construction footprint.
And that's a very different thing than a recreational bike trail.
When people picture a meandering trail through the woods, that's not what these trails are. So I think most citizens were happy when the board suggested that regional bike trails would come to the park, but no longer through the park. However, language is still in the plan that would allow for either. So there is still some concern.
So yeah, that would be a concern.
Yeah.
So going forward, if we slow down, what are the advantages? What do you see happening if we can take a breather here and engage with the commission, engage with the Met Council? And
you know, everyone has the same goals. We all share the same goals. We just have to work together to find a common ground on how best to achieve those goals. And that opportunity hasn't been given yet. And that's what would be the advantage. I don't know that anybody will be happy with the actual final outcome, but I think everyone could accept a common ground solution. And right now, that hasn't happened.
And people often think common ground means kind of a real estate deal in terms of social change, that you give up some of what you want, I give up some of what I want, and we wash out somewhere in the middle. But in fact, it doesn't have to be that way at all. In fact, if both groups or all parties concerned can bring their desires and their objectives and their needs to the table and slow down, slowing down here is crucial. Oftentimes, something totally new and different can come up that was neither the original proposal on either side, but in fact accommodates and overcomes objections and concerns for all groups involved.
Absolutely.
So, but that does take time. That's not fast. It's not easy. It's not something that you can snap your fingers and we're an instant society. We want it to happen yesterday, but no, you have to slow down and we have to listen to everybody and what the concerns are, and that's a very different process, but it can be done, and successfully so, I
think. And I think everyone would be able to move forward on a much, working together is just a better way to go than this divide that's currently taking place. And the connector trail, there's options. That we can still have a connector trail. Is it going to look just like the way it's in the plan? Maybe not. But let's consider all the options.
Yes.
And that's what we're asking for, is just slow this down. Let's really have some meaningful engagement.
And listen and make sure that we can accommodate the budget and maintenance that comes afterwards. That we don't do all of this and then have it crumble away 10 years from now.
And that's and I think across the board, even the comments, the citizens panel, the comments that have been made at public meetings. If you can't afford it, don't build it. If you can't afford to maintain it, don't build it. If it's going to take away from other park services, don't build it. If it's going to, and we haven't seen that answer. So
we have just 3 minutes left, actually, and so if people wanted to learn more and become more informed, even for their own community, if something similar is going on elsewhere, and maybe not Lebanon Hills specifically, but a similar kind of proposal or whatever, and want to know what are issues that you should become aware of and what you should be educated about and how the process can work, where would you recommend that they go? Do you have a website?
We do have a website, and we are working on building a coalition with other groups who are concerned about losing urban space. Because if something like this can happen in Dakota County and Lebanon Hills, this could happen anywhere. And I think residents who are concerned about losing the remaining urban spaces that we have really do need to be aware of how this process works. It's a long, slow process.
Yes.
And we would be happy to talk with anybody. Our website is wildlebanonhills.org.
And it's a www.
Yep,
Wild.
www.wildlebanonhills.org.
So if they
we also
go
have a
there.
Facebook page, Lebanon Hills-Wilderness in the City. It can tell you how to get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to talk to people about some of the experiences that we've had and things we've learned along the way.
Excellent. So they can learn, they can do something similar in their own communities that make better spaces for, green spaces for all of us.
And bike networks are phenomenal. Our regional parks, our natural spaces are just as phenomenal and valuable, and we can have both.
Yes.
We shouldn't have to lose one at the expense of the other.
So true, so true. So I think we have just a couple minutes left, and if you wanted, if you think about what are the key, maybe 2 or 3 points you would like people to take away from our conversation today, and I'll give you a little time to think about that.
Yes. Wow, that's hard. 2 or 3 things. I would ask that anybody who's concerned, your elected officials are the decision makers,
so that's
and
good. Contact
you want to be in touch with your elected officials. Let them know how you feel about this. If this type of development within Lebanon Hills or other regional parks concerns you, some of this funding is coming from the Legacy Amendment, and most people cited preserving natural resources as the reason they supported the Legacy Amendment.
Okay.
Let your state legislator know if this is how you wanted that money invested. Let them know what your intent was, and talk to others. Talk to other people. I think a lot of this stuff happens with very little awareness, and once people are aware of the issue, they will take action. They will. Everybody's voice should be heard.
And I think the comments prove that, because you figure most people who are active users of the park are also at that busy time of life. So they have small children, they're in schools in the evening, and they don't always have time to read the paper and to know what's going on. But when they become aware, they do respond, as we saw with the letters, or with the group that you're LebanonHills.org is the coalition they're pulling together. So people do become involved, and they want what's best for their community and their neighborhood. So they do respond to that. So I want to thank you so much for being on the show with us today and coming to share what you have found out, and kind of highlighting how you can make a difference in your community, that you can become involved and you can have a voice and you can change the way people vote, the way people understand things, and make them maybe open to trying something different or looking at things from a different perspective or a different point of view, which is very important, and it changes what happens then in our community. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, our viewers, also for joining us. Goodbye.